The day everything changed. The sun was bright over Chennai, but Sundar Pichai felt a strange weight in his chest as he stood at the small bus stop near his old school. It had been years since he left this place, yet the smell of dust and jasmine flowers carried memories that refused to fade. He looked at the cracked concrete wall where, as a boy, he used to lean while waiting for the bus to his father's office. Back then, his dreams were too big for the narrow streets he walked on. He never imagined that one day the world would know his name. He also never imagined that a single phone call would shake him to his core and force him to confront something deeper than power, success, or fame. The story begins not with triumph, but with doubt. That morning, Sundar received a call from his assistant. Her voice was calm but carried an unusual urgency.
"You might want to take this one," she whispered.
The line clicked. A deep, confident voice filled the room. "Sundar, this is Donald Trump." The pause that followed seemed to last forever. Sundar's heart slowed. He was used to calls from presidents, prime ministers, business leaders, and activists. But this one was different. There was an edge to it, a challenge hidden beneath every syllable. Trump's next words cut through the silence like a knife. "You're just an immigrant who got lucky." The words echoed inside Sundar's mind. Just an immigrant. He had heard those kinds of phrases before, but not from someone with that much global attention. The room suddenly felt smaller. His memories flashed back. The tiny two-room house he grew up in, the long walks under the hot sun to the local library, the nights he spent staring at the stars wondering if the world would ever hear his voice. He remembered the smell of his mother's cooking, his father's stories about struggling to buy their first telephone, and how that one device changed his curiosity forever. All of it collided with this moment. It wasn't just a comment. It was a test. A challenge to everything he represented. He could have responded with anger. He could have shut the call down. But instead, something inside him stirred, a calm, steady strength that came from years of walking a road filled with both shadows and light. As the world outside his office carried on with its noise, Sundar's mind drifted to the day his life took a sharp turn. He was just a young engineer, living in a modest apartment in the United States. He often felt invisible in rooms where everyone else spoke louder, dressed sharper, and carried confidence like armor. In those early days, every presentation felt like standing on a cliff's edge, unsure if the ground beneath him would hold, but he learned to listen before speaking, to observe before acting. Slowly, people began to notice not his accent, not his background, but his clarity, his patience, and his ability to solve problems others avoided. Yet, even as he rose through the ranks at Google, a quiet voice inside him often whispered, "Do I truly belong here?" It was a voice shaped by years of being underestimated. Some looked at him and saw brilliance. Others saw an outsider. His journey to becoming CEO was not a straight line. It was filled with late nights, unseen failures, quiet sacrifices, and moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. He faced people who doubted his leadership, questioned his decisions, and whispered behind closed doors. But Sundar had learned something powerful. True leadership is not about being the loudest in the room. It is about creating space for others to speak. And that quality, slowly but surely, earned him respect far beyond boardrooms. As the call with Trump continued, Sundar did not respond immediately. Instead, he listened. Trump spoke in his usual way, fast, assertive, filled with bold claims. But Sundar's silence was not weakness. It was control. Deep down, he knew this was not just a conversation between two individuals. It was a moment that the world might remember. One wrong word could turn it into chaos. One right word could turn it into history. The weight of his childhood returned again. He remembered the night when the electricity went out during exam season, and he studied by candlelight. He remembered his father telling him, "Hard work doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees growth." He remembered how his teachers told him he would one day do something meaningful, even when no one else believed it. As Trump spoke, Sundar thought about millions of immigrants around the world who faced similar words, similar doubt, similar dismissal. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had been called just something, just an immigrant, just a woman, just a kid from nowhere. Sundar's reply had to carry more than his personal story. It had to carry theirs too. He took a deep breath. His voice, when it finally emerged, was calm but unshakable. "Mr. President," he began, "luck brings opportunities, but character decides what you do with them." On the other end, there was silence. For the first time, Trump didn't interrupt. Sundar continued slowly, each word like a drop of water in a silent room. "I came to this country with a suitcase and hope, I cleaned my own dishes, waited for buses in the rain, and learned from everyone I met. If that is just an immigrant, then perhaps the world needs more of them. The silence stretched longer. Outside the window, the sun began to set over Silicon Valley, painting the sky in soft gold and red. Sundar didn't know it then, but this conversation would trigger a storm he never expected. A storm that would test not just his leadership, but his resilience, his kindness, and his sense of self. Powerful voices would rise on both sides, and the line between respect and attack would blur in ways that would leave lasting marks. As he hung up the call, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "They're going to come for you now." Sundar stared at the screen, his heartbeat steady but heavy. He didn't know who sent it or what it meant, but deep inside, he sensed that the real story was only beginning. The world had heard his words. Now the world would respond. And in the days to come, the weight of those words would lead him into rooms he never expected, face people he never imagined meeting, and uncover secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and what it means to stand for something bigger than yourself. The silence before the storm, the night after the call, was strangely quiet. Sundar sat alone in his study. The soft glow of a single lamp painting shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like whispers, carrying messages he could not quite understand. His wife had already gone to bed, and the house had that stillness that only comes when the world sleeps, but one mind refuses to rest. The unknown message on his phone kept replaying in his thoughts like a slow drumbeat. "They're going to come for you now." He had faced criticism before. He had faced corporate battles, political pressure, and media storms. But this felt different. This felt personal, like a hand slowly closing around his world. In the following days, the storm began to form quietly, almost invisibly. At first, it came through subtle headlines in the news. Commentators began discussing the phone call, picking apart every word like vultures over fresh meat. Some praised Sundar's response as dignified and powerful. Others questioned his loyalty, his intentions, and his identity. Old photos of him as a student resurfaced, showing a thin, shy young man wearing oversized shirts and carrying books too heavy for his frame. They framed him not as a leader, but as an outsider who had somehow climbed too high. The same words repeated in different forms. Just an immigrant. They echoed across screens and conversations, growing louder with each passing day. Inside Google, the atmosphere began to shift. Sundar noticed quiet glances in the hallways, hushed conversations when he entered rooms, and a certain tension in leadership meetings that had not been there before. He had always led with calmness, preferring to listen before speaking. But now every silence felt loaded. Every nod felt uncertain. One of his trusted team members pulled him aside and whispered, "They're trying to divide the board. They're using this moment to test you." Sundar nodded slowly. He knew power didn't always break through the front door. Sometimes it slipped in through cracks of doubt and fear. One evening, he decided to take a walk through the city alone, without his usual security detail. The air was cool, and the streets were glowing with the soft light of street lamps. As he walked, he thought back to his first days in America. He remembered standing in crowded subway stations, watching people rush by with determined faces, feeling both inspired and invisible. Back then, no one cared who he was. Now everyone seemed to have an opinion about him. He paused at a small cafe he used to visit as a student, a place where he had once spent hours reading about technology he could barely afford. The cafe was almost empty, except for an old man sitting in the corner, slowly stirring his coffee. Sundar ordered tea and sat by the window, watching the night pass. The old man looked up and stared at him for a moment before speaking in a soft voice. "You look like someone carrying a mountain," he said. Sundar smiled faintly, surprised by the stranger's intuition. "Sometimes it feels that way," he replied. The man nodded. "I don't know who you are, son, but remember this. Storms don't come to destroy trees. They come to test their roots." Sundar sat in silence, the words sinking deep into him like water into dry earth. He thanked the man and left. But that sentence stayed with him long after he stepped back into the cold night. Storms test roots. He knew his roots were strong, shaped by years of struggle and humility. But he also knew that storms, when fierce enough, could break even the oldest trees if they came from unexpected directions. As the pressure mounted, Sundar decided to hold a private meeting with a small group of people he trusted completely. They gathered in a quiet conference room late at night, away from the usual offices and cameras. The group included engineers who had been with him since his early days, legal advisors, and one mentor who had guided him long before he became CEO. The room was dim, the air heavy with seriousness. He spoke honestly, without the polished tone of public speeches. "This is not just about me," he said slowly. "This is about what we represent. If they succeed in turning this into a question of identity, everything we've built together will be shaken." His mentor, a woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice, leaned forward and replied, "Then we must remind them why they followed you in the first place. Not because of where you came from, but because of what you stand for." But even as they planned their next moves, a new threat emerged that none of them had anticipated. One morning, Sundar woke up to find his personal email flooded with strange messages. Some were supportive, filled with kindness from strangers around the world, but many were filled with hate. Venomous words attacking his family, his origins, and his leadership. Someone had leaked private details about his early life. Not lies, but carefully chosen fragments meant to twist his story into something suspicious. Old academic records, immigration dates, even the hospital where he was born appeared on forums. It was clear that someone had begun a coordinated attack, and they were willing to dig deep. He felt something he had not felt in a long time. A quiet, burning anger. Not the explosive kind that lashes out, but the kind that grows in silence, shaping itself into resolve. This was no longer about a single comment. It was about a narrative being rewritten in real time, one he had to challenge not with shouting but with truth and strategy. That night, as he stood on the balcony of his home looking out at the silent valley below, he felt the first drops of rain on his face. Thunder rolled in the distance. The storm had arrived. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown message appeared on the screen. This time it read, "Check tomorrow's headlines." "It's going to begin." Sundar tightened his grip on the phone. He didn't know who was behind these messages, or how deep this campaign went, but he knew tomorrow would change everything. The first crack. The morning arrived heavy with tension, like a sky holding back a storm that refused to break. Sundar woke earlier than usual, unable to ignore the strange weight pressing on his chest. The house was silent, but his phone was already buzzing. He reached for it with a sense of quiet dread, and as the screen lit up, he saw the headlines. Every major news outlet carried the same story in slightly different words. Inside the immigrant past of Google's CEO. It wasn't just the content that mattered. It was the tone. Sharp, invasive, filled with questions that made his story sound like a puzzle hiding dangerous secrets. The articles were coordinated, dropping all at once like a well-planned strike. He scrolled through them, his fingers cold. They spoke of his early education, his scholarship, the visa programs he had been part of, even neighbors from his childhood who were suddenly quoted with words that felt rehearsed. As he read, his wife entered the room quietly. She had seen this look before, though rarely. "They've started," she said softly. Sundar nodded without looking up. She sat beside him and placed her hand on his. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Her voice was steady, but beneath it he could feel her fear too. This wasn't just his battle anymore. It was theirs. By the time he arrived at the Google campus, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had experienced. Reporters swarmed outside the gates, cameras flashing like lightning, voices rising above one another. Questions were shouted from every direction, each one designed to provoke a reaction. "Mr. Pichai, are the reports true? Did you hide your immigration history? Why haven't you responded?" He walked past them silently, his face calm, his pace steady. Inside the building, however, silence greeted him. Not the peaceful kind, but the brittle kind that breaks with the slightest pressure. Employees were gathered in clusters, their conversations pausing as he passed. He could feel the doubt beginning to creep in, like water seeping through unseen cracks. He called for an emergency meeting with the leadership team. They gathered in a sleek, glass-walled conference room that usually felt inspiring but now felt like a cage. The mood was tense. Some looked at him with trust, others with cautious eyes as if waiting to see whether their leader would bend under pressure. He began to speak slowly, deliberately. "These stories are not accidents," he said. "Someone wants to shape a version of me that suits their agenda. But we will not respond with fear. We will respond with truth." One of the board members, a man known for his bluntness, leaned forward and asked, "But what if this isn't just media? What if there are people on the inside who are helping them?" The question hung in the air like a knife. Sundar's eyes narrowed slightly. He had thought about this possibility, but hearing it out loud gave it weight. After the meeting, he returned to his office. For the first time, he closed the door and allowed himself a moment of quiet. He stared out the window at the courtyard where young interns were laughing over coffee, unaware of the storm at the top floors. His thoughts drifted back to his days as a student, when he would stay up late in tiny rooms solving coding problems for hours, not for fame, but for the joy of discovery. Those moments were pure, untouched by politics or public opinion. Now every step he took was watched, analyzed, judged. That afternoon, a strange email arrived in his inbox. It had no subject, no sender name, just a line that read, "They are inside." Attached was a single image, a blurry photo of someone in a Google conference room, taken from a strange angle. Sundar stared at the image for a long time. The face in the photo was not clear, but the location was unmistakable. Whoever sent it was trying to warn him that the attack wasn't just coming from the outside. Someone close to the core had opened a door. He decided not to alert everyone immediately. Instead, he quietly called a trusted engineer who had worked with him for over a decade. They reviewed the company's internal communications and access logs, searching for unusual activity. Within hours, they discovered something unsettling. A small group of accounts had accessed sensitive internal documents related to his personal history, documents that were usually locked away under strict security. The access had been disguised under routine data checks, but the pattern was too deliberate to ignore. Someone had carefully, patiently built this breach over weeks, maybe months. As the day turned to evening, Sundar stood in the quiet of his office again. The sunset cast long shadows across the floor, making everything look stretched and uncertain. He felt the first real crack forming, not in his leadership, but in the trust that held everything together. Leadership wasn't just about standing tall when the world attacked from outside. It was also about protecting from betrayal within. The weight of this realization settled deep in his chest. He decided to take a bold step. Late that night, after most employees had left, he called 3 of his most trusted allies back to the office. Together, they formed a small, discreet task force, not to fight the media, but to uncover the internal leak quietly. He gave them one instruction: find the truth no matter where it leads. As they left the room, one of them hesitated at the door and asked, "What if the truth is someone close to you?" Sundar looked at him steadily. "Then I will face it," he replied softly. His voice didn't waver, but inside a quiet fear was beginning to grow. Betrayal always comes from places you least expect. When he finally returned home that night, exhausted but determined, he found another message slipped under his door. It was handwritten on plain paper, something no one had done in years. The message read, "You're looking in the wrong direction. Tomorrow the stage will be set." There was no signature. He stood in the dark hallway holding the note, feeling the cold air against his skin. The storm outside had grown louder, thunder rolling closer as if the sky itself was warning him. Tomorrow would not just bring answers, it would bring a confrontation. The betrayal within. The morning sky was gray and heavy, as if it sensed what was about to unfold. Sundar arrived at the office before dawn, walking through the quiet corridors of the building that usually buzzed with energy. The lights were dim, the air cold. He entered the same small conference room where, days earlier, he had gathered his most trusted allies to form the quiet investigation team. Today the room held a different weight. One of the engineers had sent him an urgent message overnight. "We found something." Sundar's chest tightened as he waited for the others to arrive. When the door closed, the lead engineer opened his laptop and turned it towards Sundar. The screen displayed a timeline of activity from the internal logs. Highlighted in red were access points traced back to someone with high-level security clearance. The name on the screen made the room fall silent. It was someone Sundar had trusted for years. Ramesh, a senior strategist who had joined him long before he became CEO. They had shared late nights, difficult decisions, and countless quiet conversations about the future of the company. Sundar stared at the name as if it were written in another language. His mind refused to accept it. Betrayal often doesn't scream. It whispers from the shadows of familiarity. One of the team members spoke carefully. "The data trails are clean, but too clean." He covered his tracks well, but not well enough. He wasn't just accessing files. He was copying them and routing them through an external encrypted channel. "It's sophisticated." Sundar leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant echo of footsteps from cleaning staff. For a brief moment, he remembered the early days when he and Ramesh would sit on plastic chairs in rented offices, dreaming of building something meaningful. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. By mid-morning, the building was alive with its usual rhythm. But Sundar's world had shifted. He called Ramesh to his office, keeping his tone calm. When Ramesh entered, he carried the same easy smile he always had. Sundar studied him closely, looking for cracks, but his expression gave nothing away. They exchanged a few polite words before Sundar turned the laptop around, showing him the evidence. For a long time, Ramesh didn't speak. His eyes flickered between the screen and Sundar's face. Finally, he exhaled slowly and sat down. "You weren't supposed to find it this soon," he said quietly. Those words cut deeper than any denial could have. Sundar felt a strange mix of sadness and clarity. Betrayal didn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it came from those who believed they were doing something righteous. Ramesh began to speak, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. "You changed, Sundar. The company changed. You talk about values, but you're too quiet while others make moves. I gave the information to people who are willing to shake things up. They're not your enemies, they're the future." Sundar listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. Inside, however, something was breaking. He spoke slowly, almost gently. "You had a choice. You could have spoken to me. You could have stood by me. Instead, you handed them a weapon." Ramesh looked at him with something between regret and defiance. "They would have taken it anyway. I just made sure it was used the right way." There was a painful silence. Two men who had once shared a vision now stood on opposite sides of a widening divide. After Ramesh left the room, escorted discreetly by security, Sundar remained seated for a long time. His hands rested on the table, his eyes fixed on the empty chair across from him. He didn't feel rage. He felt something colder, the quiet awareness that the storm had entered his walls. This was no longer about outside forces testing him. This was about the foundation itself shifting beneath his feet. He gathered the small investigation team again. "This changes everything," he said. The leak wasn't random. It was coordinated from the inside to align with the attacks outside. Someone out there is working with someone in here. Ramesh is only part of the picture. They began mapping connections, analyzing timelines, matching leaked stories with internal document movements. Slowly, a disturbing pattern emerged. Ramesh's leaks were timed perfectly with media drops and political narratives. Whoever was orchestrating this understood not just technology, but human psychology, public perception, and power structures. As the day unfolded, Sundar moved through meetings with a calm face, but inside he was piecing together a puzzle that felt far bigger than the walls of his office. By evening, he received a private message from one of the board members. It was short and chilling. "An emergency meeting has been called for tomorrow. Not by you. Be prepared." Sundar stared at the message, the words heavy. An unscheduled board meeting meant only one thing. The narrative was shifting beyond his control. Someone was trying to take the fight to the highest level. He stepped out of the building late that night, long after most had left. The city was quiet, but his mind was racing. Betrayal from someone he trusted had cracked something deep inside him, but it had also awakened a new kind of focus. Storms don't just test roots, they also reveal who stands with you when the winds rise. He stood in the cool night air, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle. Tomorrow the boardroom would become a battlefield, not of raised voices, but of silent decisions that could alter everything. As he walked toward his car, a black vehicle parked across the street flashed its headlights twice. Sundar stopped, watching. The car windows were tinted. The driver's door opened and a figure stepped out wearing a dark coat. The person didn't speak, didn't approach, just slipped a small envelope onto the hood of his car before driving away. Sundar picked up the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. "Your silence tomorrow will decide everything." He stood beneath the cold streetlight, holding the note. Tomorrow was no longer just a meeting. It was a turning point. The boardroom storm the next morning arrived with a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sundar stood by the window of his office, looking out at the campus below. The sun was rising slowly, spilling soft light across the buildings, but inside him, a quiet storm was building. The emergency board meeting had been scheduled without his approval, something that had never happened before. It was a sign that forces inside the organization were moving without his lead, testing his control, waiting to see how he would respond. He held the anonymous note in his hand. "Your silence tomorrow will decide everything." Its meaning lingered like smoke, impossible to grasp fully but heavy enough to matter. As the hour approached, Board members began gathering one by one in the large glass-walled conference room. It was a place usually filled with polite conversations, planned agendas, and strategic vision. Today it felt more like a courtroom. Sundar entered quietly, carrying no stack of documents, no prepared speech. He wore the calmness that often disarmed people, but inside his mind he was observing every movement, every glance. He noticed who avoided his eyes, who offered forced smiles, and who leaned close to whisper to others. Small details, but they revealed alliances forming beneath the surface. When the meeting began, the chairperson cleared his throat and spoke in a practiced, neutral tone. We have received serious concerns from both internal and external stakeholders regarding recent events and their impact on the company's image and leadership stability. Today's discussion is to assess our direction. The words were diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. His leadership was under review. Sundar listened carefully as one board member after another raised concerns, some genuine, some carefully rehearsed. They mentioned media storms, investor pressure, political tension, employee morale. Their voices were steady, but their eyes carried hesitation like people testing thin ice. Then came a moment that shifted the air. A board member, known for his sharp rhetoric, leaned forward and said, "This is not just about the media. It's about trust. When questions arise about a leader's past, about internal security breaches, and about their ability to defend this company's narrative, we have to ask, is silence leadership, or is it avoidance?" His words were a direct challenge. All eyes turned to Sundar. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air system. This was the moment the note had warned him about. Sundar rose slowly from his chair. He didn't bring notes, he didn't click through slides. He simply stood and began to speak. His voice was calm, steady, and clear. "I was told my silence would decide everything," he began. "And I understand why. Silence can be mistaken for weakness. But silence can also be strength. It gives space for truth to emerge without shouting over it." The board members listened closely. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in. Sundar continued, weaving his story not like a defense, but like a quiet revelation. He spoke of his journey not with drama, but with honesty. The small house in Chennai, the broken fan that clicked through hot nights, the library that became his world, the visa that brought him to a land of possibilities, and the quiet belief that kindness and clarity could lead without noise. Then he turned to the betrayal. He revealed carefully but firmly the findings about Ramesh. The room stiffened. He explained how the internal leaks had been timed with external narratives, how coordinated patterns had emerged, and how he had chosen to investigate quietly to protect the company, rather than turn it into a public spectacle. "This wasn't weakness," he said softly. "It was protection. Leadership is not about reacting to every fire. It's about making sure the foundation doesn't burn." The room shifted. Some faces softened, realizing they had underestimated the quietness they once admired. Others remained cold, their minds already tied to alliances outside the walls. But before anyone could speak, one board member who had been silent all along finally raised her hand. She was one of the newer members, respected but rarely vocal. "We need to see something," she said, "because the leaks are still happening." She pressed a button on the table and the large screen behind her lit up. What appeared made Sundar's breath catch. The screen showed a series of leaked internal communications, but not old ones. These were from just last night. Conversations from his secret task force, files related to their investigation, even fragments of his private notes were displayed. This wasn't the work of Ramesh anymore. This was happening in real time. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence as the implications sank in. Someone very close to him was still feeding information to the outside. The betrayal was deeper than he thought. The chairperson looked at Sundar. "Can you explain this?" The question wasn't hostile, but it was heavy. Sundar didn't rush to answer. His eyes scanned the room slowly, landing briefly on each face. He was searching not for guilt, but for something else. The tiny flickers people can't control when they know they've been exposed. Then he noticed it. A slight movement, barely visible, from someone he had trusted even more deeply than Ramesh. A nervous finger tapping the table, a quick glance toward the door. In that split second, he knew. The second betrayal was sitting in this very room. Before he could speak, the lights flickered. The screen went black for a moment. Then a new image appeared, one no one had prepared for. It was a pre-recorded video timed to interrupt the meeting. A blurred figure spoke in a distorted voice. "While you sit and talk about trust, the truth is already out. Tomorrow, The world will hear what has been hidden inside these walls. The video ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Sundar stood motionless, feeling the weight of every eye on him. The storm had reached the heart of power, and now time was no longer on his side. Tomorrow something much bigger was coming, something that could either destroy everything or force the truth into the open. The world falls silent. The night before the press conference felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a darkness that had no bottom. Sundar walked alone through the quiet campus, the buildings around him glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. Every step echoed softly, like memories returning from distant corners of his life. The video that had interrupted the board meeting was everywhere now. News networks replayed it on loop. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some said it was a political maneuver. Others claimed it was proof that Google was hiding dangerous secrets. For Sundar, it was something different. A line that could no longer be walked in silence. Tomorrow the world would be watching. Every word he spoke, every pause he took would be carved into the story of his life. He spent the night not with speechwriters or strategists, but sitting at his kitchen table with a single cup of tea, surrounded by old photographs. There was one of him as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a broken toy car staring at it as if it held the universe. Another of his father, standing proudly next to their first telephone, his eyes shining with quiet dreams. These images reminded Sundar of why he had begun this journey in the first place. Not for power, not for recognition, but for the belief that even the smallest voice could build something meaningful, if it carried truth and kindness. He knew that tomorrow could destroy everything he had built, but it could also free him from the shadows that had grown around him. When dawn came, the world outside was already buzzing. Journalists from around the globe filled the courtyard. Drones hovered in the sky, transmitting live feeds. Employees gathered in groups, some curious, some worried, all waiting. The stage was set in the main auditorium, the same place where years earlier Sundar had announced products that changed technology forever. But this time he wasn't launching a device. He was stepping into history. The air inside the auditorium was thick with anticipation. Rows of cameras pointed toward the stage. Reporters whispered hurriedly into microphones. Board members sat in the front row, their faces still carrying the weight of yesterday's shock. Sundar walked onto the stage without fanfare. No music, no lights, just him. As he stood behind the simple wooden podium, the room fell into a stillness so complete that even the sound of his breath felt loud. He began softly, almost like speaking to a friend. "When I first came to this country," he said, "I carried a single suitcase and a head full of dreams. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a network. I had only the belief that hard work, respect, and kindness could open doors." His words moved slowly, deliberately, as if each was placed with care. He did not read from notes. He spoke from memory, from heart. He told them about his father saving for years to buy their first phone, how that one act sparked his fascination with communication. He spoke of the struggles, the long nights, the small victories that built his path. Then he addressed the betrayals, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "Somewhere along the way I forgot that silence can be misread. While I was protecting this company from noise, others used that silence to build their own stories. Yes, there were leaks. Yes, there were people who chose to stand against me from within. But this is not a story about me versus them. This is a story about truth finding its way through layers of fear and ambition." He took a slow breath, and the next words shifted the entire atmosphere. "The truth they plan to reveal tomorrow," he said, "I will reveal today." The screen behind him lit up, not with a video from unknown figures, but with documents he had personally chosen to display. Immigration records, academic details, internal communications, everything that had been twisted and leaked over weeks was laid out openly. There were no surprises left to exploit. He had decided to take away their weapon by holding it in his own hands. The journalists leaned forward. Some of the board members exchanged stunned looks. This wasn't a defense. It was a surrender of secrecy. He continued, "This is my story, not theirs. Not a distorted version whispered through hidden channels. This is the real one. I am not ashamed of any part of it. I came here as an immigrant. I worked. I struggled. I led. And I will continue to do so with honesty." But it was his final words that changed everything. "Mr. Trump once called me just an immigrant. And he was right about one thing. I am an immigrant. But what he missed is this. Being an immigrant doesn't make you less. It means you carry two worlds inside you, and you learn to build bridges where others see walls. I am not here to prove my worth. I am here to show that worth is not something anyone else gets to define. The room fell silent. Cameras captured every second, but no one interrupted. It wasn't the silence of shock alone. It was the silence that follows when something true slices through layers of noise and lands deeply in the human heart. Outside, the feeds went live to millions of viewers across the world. People watched from their homes, from buses, from offices, and in that shared moment, the noise paused. As the conference ended, Sundar stepped away from the stage. Behind the scenes, those who had orchestrated the leak scrambled. Their timing had been stolen, their strategy undone. Even inside the board, alliances shifted quietly. Those who doubted him began to rethink. Those who stood with him felt their belief strengthen. Betrayal had cracked the walls, but truth had seeped through the cracks like light through broken glass. Later that evening, as the campus emptied and the night settled, Sundar walked alone once again. The storm had passed. Not because it disappeared, but because he had chosen to face it fully. The world had watched. The world had listened. And for one long, unforgettable moment, the world had fallen silent.